Oh, good evening. I'm Rosetta Jones, and welcome to Town Matters. My guest today is Mike France. He is the Republican-endorsed candidate for State Representative 42nd District, which includes Montville, Ledyard, and Preston. He will face his Democratic opponent, Tim Bowles, in the November 6th general election. After 20 very accomplished years in the U.S. Navy, Mike retired as lieutenant commander. He also holds 2 master's degrees, one in electrical engineering and the other in organizational management. He is in his first term as town councilor for the town of Montville, for the town of Ledyard, Montville on my mind, and he serves there too as chair of the Finance Committee. So welcome, Mike, and thanks for coming on Town Matters. And
well, thank you for having me.
Good to have you.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you, Rosetta, and to address the residents of Montville and whoever else tunes in that are interested voters.
Very good. I think it's very important to ensure that we get all the candidates on so that we can have a better understanding of what it is that you would like to do, and to make our state, better for all our citizens. So just for starters, I'd like to ask you, what inspired you to get involved with politics, and why are you running for state representative for the 42nd District?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I would say the origin of how I got to here is really rooted in the 2008 election. That election showed me that my just voting was not enough. I voted in every election since I was 18, first one being in 1980, but I found that it just wasn't enough, that I needed to become more involved in the process. So I worked a campaign in 2010 and then started talking to friends of mine that had been involved in Connecticut politics for an elected office, and to find out how the process worked. Growing up in California, the political structure is quite a bit different in New England than it is on the West Coast, and so wanted to learn what the process was. And after about a year and a half of talking to them, essentially they said that the process was to join the town committee. Each town has one for each party, and if you are going to get involved in local issues, that's the source. So I joined the Republican Town Committee in Ledyard, and then that was in January, about 18 months ago. And then in the spring, they were looking for candidates for municipal office. So I saw that as an opportunity to give back to my community. After serving in the Navy and serving my country, I saw this as an opportunity to serve the residents of Ledyard, taking the talents that I have, the experience I have, and bring it to good use. So I put forth a one-page resume, went before the nominating committee, and they decided that based on my background and experience, they recommended running for town council.
Well, you sound like a very high-value candidate. So let me ask you, what do you believe are the greatest challenges facing our state?
I think that the 2 biggest challenges we have in our state are they're both related. First is the economy and jobs, and the second is a consistent tax policy. I say they're related because one drives the other. You have to, in order to have your economy come back and provide for jobs, you need to have a stable spending plan, which then drives your tax policy. Some of the challenges that I see in business, particularly small business, if you want to have somebody who starts up a small business and they need funding, they need to go to a bank or a set of investors, and they need to have a 5-year plan to lay out how they're going to become profitable. Well, part of that 5-year plan is the expenses, and a major part of that expenses is the taxes they're going to have to pay. On top of that, a correlating thing to that is regulation. So they have to know what the expense of the different fees and the regulations they have to pay. So having an inconsistent tax policy, and what I mean by that is that the taxes continue to go up each year. They're not stable. By doing that, that prevents a business from knowing whether they can grow, what they need to do to become successful and profitable in the state. And so that really deters people from taking that risk, because it's a huge risk. 8 out of 10 small businesses fail in the first 5 years, and it's probably much higher now with the economy there is now. But that risk, many times that's personal capital. Many people mortgage their houses in order to do that. And so they're putting a great risk, and at this point the risk is so great that you really need to have the state become an inviting place for businesses by providing some consistency into what they can expect.
I see. Yeah, that's what I've heard a lot of people saying for a big concern. Let me ask you what your most important goals as candidate are, and if you have a plan to achieve those goals.
I think the most important thing that we need to do, and is to advocate for a budget that we can live within and live within our means. As a town councilor and chair of the finance committee in Ledyard, we put together our budgets by working with the mayor, the board of ed, and the superintendent. We were able to put forth a budget, maintaining all our town services, as well as maintaining the quality of education without having to raise taxes. I think that was very important, given the economy that we have now, and also realizing in our area, southeastern Connecticut, that Ledyard's mill rate is one of the highest in the area, that we needed to come forth with a budget that lived within our means. The common sense principles that led me there were, first, don't spend more than you have, and second is don't borrow more than you can afford to pay back. If you come in with those principles, then you can create a budget that lives within the means that you have and go forward. At the state level, Governor Malloy, when he came into office, had 3 basic priorities of how he was going to put the state on a fiscal sound plan. The third option being raising taxes. In the case of this, it turned out that the first 2 options didn't work out, and he ended up raising taxes. My point to bringing that up is if you're willing to raise taxes, I don't care if you have 10 options, and it's the 10th option. If you're willing to raise taxes, you can create any budget you want.
Well, that's true.
Because if all the first 8 or 9 or whatever options that come ahead of raising taxes fall apart, you can always raise taxes. So you need to come in with a principle that I'm not going to raise taxes. Let's maintain the tax rates where they are and then live within our means. Whatever that revenue projection, that's what we have, and we don't get to spend any more.
Well, that certainly does, it's a very sound approach to trying to stabilize, the fiscal, position of the state right now. You mentioned 2 other plans that the governor had. Really, I was only familiar with the one, and that was, of course, you just continue to increase taxes, but it seemed to be a little short on the side of cutting spending.
That was part of his plan was that, and there was also he was going to work with the unions to gain concessions from them. That was an unsuccessful effort, unfortunately. But he had a 3-option plan. The third option was the taxes, and unfortunately, the first 2 didn't work out, and he ended up raising taxes in order to close the gap.
Yeah, and and that tax increase, that was the largest. It's a historical increase, actually, for the state of Connecticut.
Oh, it absolutely was. I mean, almost $1.8 billion, and I think the most insidious part of that it wasn't really straightforward. If you raise income taxes, it's straightforward. It's going to go from 5% to 6% or 5% to 5.5%. What the governor did in proposing the taxes, he proposed increases in a number of use taxes. And so what you had
a lot of consumer taxes.
Right, a lot of consumer taxes. Right. You had increases in the gas tax. You had increases in for women who go get their nails done and hair done. You had a 10% tax on that. So you had a lot of people that were impacted that they didn't find out really the impact until they went to go get these services provided to them. And I think those taxes are regressive in the sense that they affect the low and lower middle class more disproportionately for 2 reasons. One, they're the consumers can least afford the additional cost, and secondly, many of the providers of those services are people that are in that demographic. So they are now likely seeing a reduction in the number of clients that they have come see them because they can't afford it. So they are seeing fewer clients, and so you have a double effect of a tax like that. Yeah,
well, people are certainly having to make choices about whether they're going to support a a service that might be considered, somewhat of a luxury versus essential goods and products that are needed.
Absolutely.
So it's a big struggle for a great many people today, and it certainly has cut into all of our discretionary income.
Well, it's true, and unfortunately, in my opinion, the state shouldn't be driving, they shouldn't be dictating what those choices are by tax policy. I think that is the worst way to decide what your tax policy is going to be, is by determining what an individual consumer can and can't afford based on a use tax.
So do you think that part of that problem kind of rests within this pot of money, like state income taxes? Well, and to the state income tax, it was retroactive back to January, and that was really painful as well. But, also sitting on the council, do you feel that because the money appears to be kind of, anonymous, because you aren't really facing those individuals that you're taking money out of their pockets from? And so, and you adjust the budget based on, well, what do we need to spend this year? And then, of course, as you said, you just go ahead and raise taxes because you want to cover that budget. And then there aren't the faces of the people, the real lives that are being impacted at that moment in time. So it makes it somewhat, it's a disconnect with how it impacts human lives.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think that what we're seeing at political leadership at every level, federal, state, local level, too many times they forget that by increasing a small tax rate. I'll give the experience of my own town. When the budgets were presented by the mayor and the Board of Ed, it was a small tax increase, about 1%. You think about 1%, what's the big deal there? Well, given, as I said, that our tax rate, mill rate was one of the highest in the area, even a 1% increase is significant. And when you have people that, they're not seeing pay raises, most people are not seeing a pay raise for last year.
Most people are taking pay cuts.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And if they're transitioning jobs, they certainly were taking pay cuts.
That's true, yeah.
And so in my job as serving the people of Ledyard, and I would see the same thing if serving the residents of the state in the 42nd District, we have a responsibility to remember that every time we raise tax, we're taking money out of people's pockets, and that's the discretionary income that they have to live their livelihood. What their lifestyle is going to be is very much
dictated a lot by the property taxes and gas taxes and all the other taxes that have been imposed.
That's right.
So it's kind of taken folks, to their knees, and a lot of people are just looking for other places to live. Just moving on, and again, kind of on the same subject now, the governor did create this job creation initiative, and so part of that initiative is Jackson Lab, which has become a big controversy because $291 million in taxpayer dollars were granted to this laboratory to create 200 to 300 jobs over, I don't know, by 2017, I understand. But then someone said, no, it's actually over a 10-year span, but I'm not sure. But also 17.5 million is earmarked for ESPN. And as well, and that's, a $7 billion industry. And there's Alexion, where 51 million was given to them in the form of a grant to move from New Haven, it's a pharmaceutical company, to move from New Haven to, from Cheshire to New Haven. So, and again, with the same understanding under the premise that they're going to create 200 to 300 jobs over the next 5 years or 10, I'm not sure. Now, it seems to me that's an awfully high investment for so few jobs over such a long period of time. And I'm not really sure how the taxpayers are being protected if this really does not work out. So do you believe that these extremely generous cash incentives would result in stimulating the job growth and really bring some value-added job to the state?
Well, I think the challenge you face just in general is when you start giving incentives to companies to come to your state or to move within a state or to claim they're going to increase jobs, expand. I think that what the state is doing, the government is doing, whatever level it happens at, they're picking a winner and a loser. they are choosing which companies to support and which ones not to. And what that does, unfortunately, in the political climate, generally that's somebody that is connected to whoever the party that's in power or the person who's in power. So Governor Malloy or somebody within his administration probably knows somebody at these companies that they're trying to help. I think the issue that you really want to do is you want to provide an economic climate that allows all businesses to thrive. If you do that, not only will you see the businesses stop leaving the state, and the 18 to 34 demographic, which we're seeing a large number leave the state, I think you will see businesses come back to the state. The state of Texas is seeing remarkable growth by providing pro-business policies within the state. If you do that, then you don't have to incentivize companies to come to your state because you are more attractive than the other states in your area. And so I think that is the more long-term approach. Because many times what you see when you give either a tax abatement or tax incentives or a influx of funds for a short period of time, once that money's gone, if there isn't a demand for that product or service that is ongoing, they shutter up or they leave. They find another state that's going to give them an incentive to come to their state. So you need to create a climate for the business, and you need to have a demand for a good or a service, which is how our country survived and how our country grows. A company provides a service that is needed or a product that is needed, and the consumer takes advantage of that product or service. That's how you generate revenue, and that's how you create a vibrant economy, and that's what we need to do.
So let me ask you this. So looking at the bigger picture and, with the declining economy and the high unemployment, how would you go about creating a more favorable climate for small businesses to thrive?
I think the first thing you do, as I said, going back to the stable tax policy, I think once you have established, and it's not something where you can just say, I'm going to do it, because actions speak much louder than words.
That's true.
You need to create budgets that remain with a stable tax rate, and that is not something that happens overnight. I think the second thing that you need to do when you want to make the statement that Connecticut is open for business, we heard the governor say that when he came in. I think the biggest thing you have there as indication is regulation. Are you adding regulation or are you removing regulation to small business? There are some things that are needed. But an example of something in the last cycle that they added was the requirement for paid sick time.
Yes.
That is a cost to the business that they didn't have before. So that particularly small business.
I think of it businesses with 50 or more employees. Right. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you look at that cost somewhere in the neighborhood of around $4,000 to $5,000 per employee. So 50 employees, $250,000 that small business has to pay out, because if they have the sick time, they're going to make use of it when they're sick. But that means that the business owner lost that opportunity, lost that revenue. So how does he recoup that? Well, if you average about $60,000 per year salary, that's probably 2 to 3 employees that he has to choose. He has to choose whether to let 2 or 3 employees go or raise his cost of what he's selling or the service he's providing. Unfortunately, many of these small businesses in the market, they don't have the option of raising their cost or raising the price they charge. And so they have no choice but to cut cost. And unlike the government, that's what they do to survive, because otherwise they go out of business.
So do you think there was probably another way to do that, pass some type of bill that would permit these service employees, because most of them come from the service industry, some sort of benefit that they could at least be paid if they did become ill and weren't able to, to report to work? Right.
Well, my own company, they have just paid time off. And you get so many days of paid time off. And so many companies do that today, as opposed to vacation versus sick time. That's really an outdated mode of providing benefits to people. What I would argue is that in the free market, what you have 2 different companies. One may offer greater time off than another. And if that's something that's important to you, just no different than health benefits.
Okay.
you would then look at that as part of the overall package. If one company's offering you $5,000 more a year and you don't need the health care, but another company offers you less with health care, you make that choice when you decide what company you're going to work for in the service you provide.
So at least those options are there as opposed to being imposed.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
Right.
Okay. Now, as far as your core philosophy to achieve a greater, more efficient and less redundant state government, how would you've already touched upon some of those proposals, so when you want to add anything to that in terms of?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we see at every level of government, and I'm confident the state of Connecticut is no different, you have organizations within the state government that do similar or the same function, but you have overhead costs for that. So you have managers, you have senior people that are managing that process, and that overhead cost could be done away with by merging functions within the government. There are some times where through just the process of developing a new service that's provided within the state, you think you have to create a whole new department. You have to create a whole new institution.
Yeah, the state is good at doing that.
They are, and once you create it, it never goes away.
Yeah, that's a good point.
What we tend to find with programs is once it's started, the only thing that happens is they keep adding money to it. And nobody really ever goes back to critically look at what was the original intent of that function of government, and has it been met? And if it has, then let it go and use that money for what's really needed. If it hasn't been met, what is still needed? My background in engineering, I've been an engineer for 30 years, 20 years in the Navy and almost 10 out. I approach problems from a perspective of return on investment and risk. And so when you look at a particular department within the government, you have to look at what was its intent. Has its intent been met? If it hasn't, what does it need to do to meet the intent and to better serve the people that are paying for that service, which are the taxpayers?
Yep.
And then once you do that, then you assess if you're making a change. Too many times, I believe politicians, they make a change, they look in a vacuum. They take this one particular piece of government. I'm going to fix that one piece without considering the impact to maybe 3 or 4 other parts of the government. As an engineer, we always look at that. We look at the impact, the ripple, if you will, and you decide you also look at multiple outcomes, and you decide to assess what is the bad outcome and how can I minimize the risk of that happening. If I have 3 potential outcomes, 1 is bad, 2 are satisfactory, I want to minimize the risk of the bad thing happening and then allow one of the 2 things that are positive to happen.
So similar to really like an occult result-based accountability, but really operationalizing that and making it something that truly can function in government to, just to screen out what isn't working, get rid of that, and then to fully support what is working.
Absolutely.
And so that's something that we seem to not have achieved yet, because when any department or any state agency is, once it's created, then it never goes away, even though it can outlive its usefulness. So
that's correct.
And just speaking of a ripple effect, I just want to touch upon the recent case with the Mashantucket Pequot tribe versus the town of Ledyard. And the U.S. District Court granted a summary judgment in favor of the tribe. And it says, in part, that the tribe is immune from having to pay personal property taxes on their slot machine enterprise. And that's, in our town too, has the other largest casino. So, and that's based on a lot of legal language, but I guess in a way kind of succinctly put, because that is a part of their sovereign nation, and because that enterprise helps to support their way of life and their business entity and also their autonomy, then the town cannot impose that tax. And so my question to you, and we're brazen as well, is have you had a chance to calculate the impact of revenue losses to the town as yet? And is it feasible for the town to go ahead and pursue an appeal on this decision? And if the voters will get a chance to decide on that at the November general election?
Well, very briefly, the
2 minutes, okay.
yeah, the issue that you're dealing with is the sovereignty of the tribal nation, and it is in its own nation. The difference here is that the slot machines are not owned by the tribe.
They're leased.
They are leased.
Yes.
And so if the tribe owned the slot machines, we would have no question. They would be owned by the tribe.
It would be a lot more clear cut.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The practice for leased equipment is that the company that owns the equipment pays the tax. So that the Mashantucket tribe is not paying, in the Pequot, is not paying that tax. It's paid by the owner of the slot machines out of the revenue. What we believe that the decision by the district court was an error, so the town is planning to appeal that decision.
Okay. Will that be a referendum?
No, it's
question,
brought
or-
before the town council,
Okay.
and the mayor talks to that. And the principal issue is one of exactly as I described. This is not an issue of a sovereign nation owning equipment. It is really they lease equipment, and the company that leases it to them is the one that's paying the tax.
Yes, I understand, but I wish you a lot more luck than what we had with the litigation against Ram Whitney, because that became a really protracted,
Right.
situation there, and it lasted for like 15 years. And we
It's-
ended up
it's-
paying,
right.
$11 million to them.
Well, it's
And
very challenging.
it truly is. And then just lastly, we have like a minute and a half. I just want to ask you what makes you the best candidate, the one that the voters should choose on November the 6th.
Well, thank you for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity. I think the biggest thing that I bring to the table is leadership. I think that every level of our government, we're seeing a lack of leadership. I think that the 20 years in the military trained me to do that. I took advantage of every opportunity that was there and had good leaders over me who were able to impart their lessons and knowledge. I think that moving beyond the military, I've been able to demonstrate that leadership both within my own company as well as at town level and representing the residents of my own town. I think that's the key, along with the experience of putting together budgets within my own town and bringing forth, I think, representing them well by bringing forth budgets that live within the means that we have and not having to raise taxes to bring forth programs we can't afford.
Well, I certainly do appreciate you coming on the show, and I did notice that you were able to orchestrate a 0% tax increase this past fiscal cycle for your town. I'm sure the town people definitely appreciated that. I know ours would have as well, but we weren't as fortunate. But anyway, I want to thank everyone for tuning in today to Town Matters, and I look forward to our next show, and please go out and vote on November the 6th.